Hello and welcome back to the County Chat channel for the last of the 2025 previews. Of course, it is still previews, I'm calling them. Admittedly, it only took me to the roundup at the halfway point of the season to finish them off. But anyway, it is the champions of the last 3 years, the Brown Caps, the residents of the Keir Oval, the club with a royal crest in the logo with Prince of Wales's feathers on the crest. Who is the Prince William? It is, of course, the dominant force of county cricket in the last few years and the only team not covered yet on the County Chat. Looking for a four-peat, it is, of course, Surrey County Cricket Club. As I mentioned, sort of the dominant force over the last few years. And yeah, obviously the last team we'll be previewing here on the County Chat. As I sort of mentioned throughout that, the previews have been a bit slower than I would have hoped for here at the County Chat channel. But, you know, kind of at this point, I guess it's a bit of a review of the first half and a preview of the rest of the season. I will be doing little sort of Division 1 and Division 2 sort of mid-season updates as I'm sort of finishing off this bit of the season, if you will, with the previews. Excuse me. But anyway, onto the sort of the leadership group, I guess. It's captained again by the club legend and one of the sort of now at this point, one of the most winningest captains in sort of in the county's history of Surrey, but also county championship history. It's Rory Burns. Surrey have been one of the best run clubs in this last 7 or 8 years and are chasing history a bit with that four-peat, as I mentioned. The last time that was done, and the reason why I guess it is historical, is the last time it was done by anyone was in the 50s by Surrey themselves, and before that by Yorkshire in the 20s when they had a sort of a ridiculous level of dominance. Yorkshire, just having looked through it myself, it was quite something to look at. You can find a Wikipedia page where it has all the winners, and it's just like Yorkshire. That's why they're like 15 ahead of anyone else, which is Surrey. Anyway, Burns himself in that case, obviously he captained all the three of the three-peat, but also captained the 2018 victory that Surrey had. So at this point he's got 4. He's actually one of the most successful captains in county cricket history, which is quite a cool thing. He is now chasing the record of Yorkshire's captain during that sort of dominant 20s era, and it's sort of a sign of the times of what the captain is called, because I couldn't find a name other than his full name being Lord Hawke. Again, I'm sure he has a first name. Lord Hawke is Lord is his title. But anyway, the fact that they were captained by a guy called Lord Hawke, I think is a bit of a sign of the times, slightly less professional athlete vibes back then. But yeah, it sort of shows, I guess, where, Surrey are at, where Rory Burns is at, is where, they are kind of in the pantheon of history, and they're kind of looking at teams around them and seeing, teams in from the past, and saying, like, we're actually chasing sort of a historical landmark here, especially kind of in the modern era of cricket. It hasn't really been done. Anyway, getting on to the coach. The coach since 2022 has been Gareth Batty, the former sort of spin bowling legend for the club. He's been the coach for the whole three-peat. He wasn't the coach in that 2018 run, and that is because he retired from cricket in 2021, as in playing cricket. Which I just think is the most brilliant. Like, you couldn't have a much better start to your coaching career. Effectively, he became an assistant coach, and then the head coach, Solanki at the time, Vikram Solanki, took an IPL gig. So he was the interim head coach for that first season, and then they won the league as him as coach, and then he just kept the job. So in his first 3 years as a head coach, he's won 3 back-to-back county championship titles, which I just think, you can't really question that, and it's just one of those. It's like quite a cool start to a career of coaching if Gareth Batty continues on for a while. I think it's safe to say that the leadership group at this point we would easily say is the best in the country, as I've gone through the sort of leadership groups of all these counties. I mean, yeah, you can't question it when they've won that many. How clearly outstanding they have been. So yeah, and sort of all credit to the above mentioned men, but I feel like the person you really should mention when you're talking about Surrey's success over the past decade is actually Alex Stewart. He at the end of 2024 actually stepped down from being the director of cricket, but for the 13 years before that, he has helped sort of build the best team on the field, I think it'd be safe to say, in that last 10 to 13 years, and probably, and I don't know the finances for sure, but I think you would probably guess one of the most financially successful and sustainable clubs in the country, especially in a sort of era where, counties have struggled. he took over the club, and I don't know what quite the timing was, but he took over the club, and they had stints in Division 2, which is, don't know if it was actually when he took over they were in Division 2, or whether or not it was in the time he was in the job where they went down to Division 2. But it's kind of almost impossible to imagine Surrey as a Division 2 county nowadays. But again, it shows you can sort of how quickly a team can fall apart. But he's just provided stability, that sustained success, and I think as much as anything, I think what proves is he is such a great ambassador of that role and has been so perfect for Surrey is he stepped down this year to look after his family a little more, spend more time with his wife, who really unfortunately has cancer, and they haven't haven't replaced him. He's still a special advisor, so I guess that means he can be at the end of the phone at any instant, but he doesn't come into Surrey's ground or whatever, and he spends time with his family, which is amazing. Well, I think it proves, just in the cricketing perspective, like how valued he must be, that they just didn't replace him, and they thought no one could actually get into that role and it work as well as it worked with him there. So I think you just got to tip your cap to Alex Stewart, as such a legend for Surrey anyway. I mean, as a player, but he's then gone on to be, he's kind of built them to be sustained success for the future, and I guess that's why he could leave the role in a totally happy way, because he's built that sort of infrastructure for the club to be dominant in the future, and I think that must be recognised. So shout out to Alex Stewart. Not many shout outs to directors of cricket on the county chat, but there you are. Anyway, as we sort of do with these previews, we do the weakest side of the batting or bowling, of the sort of two main phases of the game. I think it's almost impossible for Surrey. I think when you've won 3 titles back-to-back, it's safe to say that you've got almost as good batting as you have bowling. I think I would have almost always said their bowling was their strength, I think just because of the depth of seamers. I think the batting always kept them in games, and then I think the bowling would often take them away in the last 3 years. At least that would be the way I looked at it. And maybe the way teams would try and build a successful team is kind of around the image of which Surrey has built them. This season so far, though, their bowling has really struggled. I'm not going to sort of turn around and say it's their weakness now. I'm going to stick with the batting maybe being slightly weaker. Again, it's hard to say. I think, but that has much more been down to the pitches they've played on, I think, and maybe just the general conditions around the UK to start the season. Excuse me. So, yeah, as I say, we'll start off with the batting. And as I kind of just alluded to, Surrey have been in some difficult positions at the start of this season. Some teams have really got them close, but they're still yet to lose a game. And I think in a lot of those situations, Surrey have had to bat out for draws and play longer. And I think the really hallmark of their success in the batting is their openers. As I've mentioned, they've been a bit, admittedly, on quite, fairly placid pitches, but Surrey have been under pressure in a lot of situations. But Sibley and Burns, the 2 openers, just almost always seem to take the sting out of a bowling lineup. I'll be first to admit that I'm often looking out for Surrey's results to see if they're losing, because I think it's just like, if you're in a team who is in Division 1, you need to know if Surrey are doing well or not, because it's like they are the champions with the target on their back. Man City and football would be an example in the Premier League. So I think I'm always looking out for Surrey to see if they're doing well. And it almost always seems like when they're under pressure, one of Sibley or Burns will be like 40 off 150 balls and just going nowhere but dropping anchor. I think they've done it against Essex a few times. They've done it against a few teams this season, and battered out to draws. And they kind of now, it almost feels like a retro approach to batting, especially Sibley, as I mentioned, but even, Rory Burns is a diminutive kind of opener, kind of classical, knows where he scores and doesn't try and be too expansive. But I think, that over the course of the last 3 years and a bit longer than that, those two as an opening pair, also kind of classical right hand, left hand, they just take the power, they take the sting out of opening, teams that get on a roll. I think often in county cricket, it's kind of winning those moments in a day, the hour before the end of a day 3, before they need to bat the whole of day 4, and it just feels like Surrey always win those hours or always do well enough. I think often throughout this series in the county chat, I've spoken about sort of proven scorers, and when talking about batters, is that every cricketer who bats in the top 5 or 6 for a county is an exceptionally talented cricketer. It's that ability and confidence to know you can go big, and I think those kind of play, and that's what I mean when I'm talking about proven scorers. And I think Burns and Sibley are kind of a perfect example of that. It feels like once they get to 30 off 60, 70 balls, they're so hungry for runs that they often don't give it away. And I think that's a real positive for any kind of team. in any level of cricket, but I think in county championship, I think it really, stands out. At 3, and again, there's been multiple players who play at 3, and we'll have that a lot with Surrey's lineup because they have just so many England internationals, effectively. But at 3 is England's own Ollie Pope. Pope's record for Surrey is quite something. He makes batting look at the Oval almost as if it's impossible to get out at points. I think he's one of those players who, at his home ground of the Oval, he just looks unbelievable. Of course, his sort of his international commitments limit him playing for Surrey, but it does feel like whenever he puts on the brown cap, he just plays incredibly well. I mean, if the rumours, are to be true around Jacob Bethel and whether or not they're going to be bringing him straight into the team when the Red Bull stuff comes back up, who knows? So maybe Surrey will be licking their lips and thinking, oh, we might have Ollie Pope back in our team not too long. I think that's a bit more fanciful. I mean, I personally don't see it. Would it be incredibly Bazball? Yes, it would. So who knows? Surrey also picked up Curtis Patterson for a 3-match stint. He's already done this 3-match stint, and again, it's just a typically savvy Surrey move, as I've written it here. They had a proven Red Bull scorer from Australia, brought him over for 3 games, and I think he scored 100 at least one of them, and scored some runs. It's just a kind of a classic Surrey move. I think it's just having the money to spend on an international overseas who they know is going to score runs or know is going to take wickets, and then just doing it. And I think it's just acting now. And they just consistently seem to get on the right side of those kind of moves. Anyway, similar to sort of Ollie Pope, there's Jamie Smith. Another one of those Surrey standout wicketkeeper batsmen who's now playing for England. I mean, Smith at this point, as I've sort of mentioned about, Pope's kind of questionable place, he seems more of a lock for England than Pope. I mean, he's favoured in that white ball cricket, opening the batting in this recent series. A stroke-making wicketkeeper batter he was just a great top-order option for Surrey and England. Anyway, following the nature of the talent that Surrey have in abundance of just players who are just easily good enough to play for England or do play for England, Dan Lawrence. I think if you really went, for all-round skill, Dan Lawrence could be even one of England's most talented cricketers. I mean, he's moulded in the shape of Bazball, and when in full flow, I think Lawrence's ball striking is amongst the best in the country. If not the best. I genuinely think sometimes he is spellbinding to watch when he's at his best form. I mean, watching him bat at Hove this season was quite something. I think Surrey signing him from Essex, I can't remember how many years ago it was now, maybe 2 or 3. I think was one of the most clear power moves from a direct rival that I've ever seen in county cricket. I've not been around it for very long, compared to some people who cover this sport. But I remember just thinking, Essex had come second, I think, the season before, or third, and then Surrey, who were the champions, signed their best young player, and it was a bit like, whoa, that's such a move, especially given they have Will Jacks, who I'll get onto in a minute. And he's been really, really good. And again, he's incredibly talented cricketer when you just talk about his batting, and we'll get into his bowling later on. Following Lawrence in the sort of swathe of ex/current England players that I've mentioned, perhaps the most mentioned in around sort of England selection nowadays, more as much as Pope or Smith, is around England still is the wicketkeeper, and he's widely considered the best gloveman in the country. It's Ben Foakes. I mean, his batting he had a real bad 2024 with his batting. He averaged just about 26 over a whole season and scored only 404 runs. He's already passed that mark so far this season with run scoring form at 528 and an average of 66. I think I'm probably labouring the point, but it's just one of many incredibly talented English players that Surrey have. I mean, Foakes is kind of as Surrey as it goes. He's always been there and has been a standout for them for a while. And that surprised me the other day. I thought he was a lot older than he is. I think he's like 32, which might not be a surprise to some people, but it was to me. And who knows? His best time, his best sort of batting could be ahead of him. And he's been doing a lot better at sort of batting with the tail, which is kind of often his big drawback compared to his teammate in Jamie Smith. Anyway, continuing with England players, up next is Sam Curran. I mean, an highly in-demand white ball cricketer, but it's easy to forget how special of a red ball cricketer Sam Curran was and is. Remember when he first came into the lineup in that India tour? God, that would be all the way back in 2018 now. But he was the standout player in that tour, and that tour where India toured England, and he was brilliant. And ever since his last test, he's got a whopping test average of 56. Like every time he said test average, first class average. Ever since his last test, his first class average is 56, which is, for a sort of a bowling all rounder or just straight up all rounder, is just that's spectacular. So again, another incredibly talented cricketer, and similar to Dan Lawrence. I mean, he's even better bowler than Dan Lawrence. We'll get onto his bowling in a little bit. Jason Roy, again, another ex-England international, has attempted a red ball comeback in some games this year. I mean, I don't think he scored more than 5 runs in any of those innings. I think it shows the strength of Surrey, if you ask me, when they can kind of fit a player into their middle order without any real reason. I don't remember the last time he played a red ball fixture, Jason Roy. I mean, it's just kind of almost club cricketish. I mean, he's the best mate of the skipper. He's a really talented cricketer, no lie. I mean, of course he is, but I think and he's still good enough to win games, of course, from the middle order. I'm not claiming he isn't. I think it's just funny, given the kind of extended run of bad form he's had in red ball cricket. Comes back into the best team in the country and then goes straight into the team when all the talent they have around it. I think his inclusion, as I say, good enough to score runs. But with the talent available for Surrey, his inclusion is probably not hurt by being Rory Burns. He was Rory Burns' best man at his wedding. Anyway, that's just sort of by the by. But I just enjoyed the kind of club cricket nature of that in many ways. Another international cricketer that Surrey have on the books is Will Jacks. Again, more of a white ball cricketer, you would probably say. But in many ways is incredibly similar to Dan Lawrence. I mean, really powerful batsman. He's got all the strokes whilst also bowling, very, very handy right arm off spin. Anyway, finally, we're away from non-international players or ex-international players. Ryan Patel, that's a proper county cricketer right there. He's an all-round great cricketer for Surrey. He sort of often is batting in that sort of 7 or 8 role whilst bowling medium pace. And last year he averaged 47 with the bat, got a couple of hundreds. He can play sort of near the top of the order. I think he has opened the batting even and batted 3 in the past. It's just a case of Surrey, again, having that strength and depth, as we're mentioning, that he just often is batting further down the lineup. And again, similar to him. Ryan Patel, really good batter. Very underrated batter. I feel like I almost was glossing over him there. But Ryan Patel, lots of love to him. Cameron Steele is sort of the leg spinning equivalent to Patel, I guess. I think, grew up as a top order batter, always was a top order batter, now bats about 6 to 8 for Surrey. And he's a very good second still with their bowling. I think they're quite similar because Cameron Steele is a spinner, whereas Patel is a seamer, so there's a bit more of a, medium pacer, is a bit more of a sort of comparison there. They're both good batters who bowl very good spin or seam in that case. And again, they're both players where if you looked at their career records, almost like the bowling average, the batting average, you maybe not see the value in them. But they're both cricketers who I've seen win games for Surrey. Again, it's just a case of they have game changers in their lineups, and those two are 2 of them. Anyway, another bowling all-rounder, or another all-rounder, I guess you'd say, Jordan Clark is a sort of the bowling all-rounder for Surrey, if you will. And in my opinion, in their championship winning campaign of last year, he was the most valuable player they had. And not mainly because of his contributions with the ball, but his 467 runs he got at an average of 33 is a kind of perfect bowling all-rounder figures. He got 100 in one of the games, which was incredibly important. And he's just an incredibly good cricketer. And again, he's one of those players who hasn't ever represented England. And if you looked at England's best 11 cricketers right now, it's in English conditions, you'd struggle to argue against Jordan Clark, in my view. Anyway, similarly, when available, another England international, we've got Jamie Overton. He's incredibly similar in many ways to Jordan Clark, even. He's sort of talented fast bowler who can bat very well at the lower order. There is so many cricketers that Surrey have in their sort of lower order who are similar to that. But anyway, Jamie Overton, brilliant slip fielder as well, and just one of those kind of players who are always in and around the England setup, so again, just doesn't play that often. A younger equivalent to sort of those two, I guess you'd say, is Tom Laws, who is an incredibly talented seam bowler, but his batting average, I think, is something in the 20s. He's 22, I think he's about my age. And he's one of those players where you just think if he was in any other county, he would be like playing every single game. But he kind of comes in and out the side because of the kind of the plethora of options. As I'm finishing that, I'm totally aware that there's so many other bowlers who can bat. I will kind of just do a little asterisk when I'm mentioning their bowling, because otherwise I would be here for genuinely so long if I had to mention all their batting and their bowling kind of separately. I just realised that I've already done the script, so I may as well just sort of stick with that. As I feel like I was talking for ages about the batting depth of Surrey. They have so many bowlers who can bat deep. So I think it's again another reason why they are so difficult to beat. And I think it's the reason their bowling can be such a strength, because they can play almost so many more bowlers because of how good the lower order batting is for Surrey. Again, I think it's a bit of a archetype that sort of other teams have started to do a little bit, and having a lot of batters throughout. In Division 2 so far this season, Leicestershire have been the standout team, and that's exactly what they have. It's almost like a 1 to 11 of cricketers who can bowl and bat, and a wicketkeeper, obviously. I think I think the strength and depth, is what makes the bowling lineup just so sort of overwhelming, perhaps, for other teams and just the teams that they play. And of course, as a general thing, their strength and depth and consistency of sort of from their youth academy. There's so many England players, as I was just mentioning, but they also just they spend money in clever ways with their overseas budget. It does always feel like Surrey have an incredibly good seam bowler and incredibly good players just coming in for a few games here and there. This year, I'd say there has been the most questions I've seen about Surrey's bowling, and I think Surrey fans would 100% put it down to a lot of the away wickets they've played on have been incredibly dead wickets. Slow, not much for the pace bowler, because Surrey don't have a frontline spinner, and we'll get onto that in a minute. I think, retrospectively, kind of getting onto a different discussion here, I think retrospectively counties may regret doing what they've done to Surrey and playing them on very flat pitches, because Surrey's batting has always been good enough to stick in those games, and the batting, the drawing points are incredibly generous, in my opinion, in the county champ. And I just think Surrey are in second, and they've not even won that many games, and that's because they've drawn almost all of their games and not lost any, because they've not been on pitches where you could kind of see a loss as a result. As I've written to myself here, without getting lost in the sort of ins and outs of the county champ scoring system of bowling, let's move on to their bowling and sort of talk about why I think it is just such a potent bowling lineup. The leaders of the bowling lineup for me, for Surrey, are Jordan Clark and Dan Worrell. Clark, especially in the last year or so, has reached his career best for bowling. So far this season, he's taken 25 wickets at an average of 25, which is quite neat. And matches that matches his bowling lineup from bowling average, from from the entirety of last season, where he took nearly 40 wickets. Those bowling averages are well beneath his bowling averages for his career. I think his bowling average for a career is just about 30, and his bowling average over the last 2 years is just about 25. I think that shows he's just kind of at that peak of his career, and everything's kind of coming together. He's one of those bowlers when he gets into a full flow, Jordan Clark, he's streaky. He just takes wickets in bunches, and he can go through a whole lineup and again be a real match winner. I think he's one of those players who loves taking the game by the scruff of the neck and is a real competitor when he's out there on the field. He just gets wickets in bunches. I think he's one of those players. And Dan Worrell, sort of on the other end, is kind of unerringly consistent with the ball, and in last year he kind of matched that with wicket taking. He did both really last year. He averaged 16 with the ball, with an economy about 2.5, whilst taking 52 wickets. I think that was a bit of a sort of anomaly. I think he's an incredibly good and talented bowler, but I think just that many, that much, wicket taking is not really to the sort of archetype of player that he is. But that economy rate as of sort of 2.5 is very much so. This year he's doing really well with that economy and still taking plenty of wickets. It's just not quite to the same level. And he's still, being an incredibly valuable player for them. I think it's a lot more for him down to those kind of more placid wickets, and maybe he's just not getting the wickets as he did last year. But I think he still does the thing of really controlling an end, and I think that's a really, really important thing for Surrey. Anyway, Surrey's main signing for 2025 was the seamer Matthew Fisher from Yorkshire. And if you watched the Yorkshire preview, I think you would have seen that I wasn't a huge fan of the signing. I didn't think it was a particularly good one. I just didn't see it as an upside for Surrey, and it wouldn't have surprised me that he was going to be a player that sort of was not like that. He was sort of the opposite of that. Despite some good signs, he's taken 8 wickets. His wickets have come at an average of 62. He, like the other bowlers, have not been helped by the flat pitches, of course, but the statistics are easily the weakest amongst his peers. Dan Worrell, Jordan Clark, and we'll get on to some other bowlers in the future. He's just one of those players. An incredibly, mixed kind of bag for him so far, and I think he's got all the talent to succeed. He just hasn't succeeded so far, and I just think for Surrey, he's not of the calibre of bowler that Surrey kind of would want, I would say. But again, I'm sure Matthew Fisher will prove me wrong as the season progresses. Kiwi Nathan Smith, who, again, here's a quick asterisk, can very much bat. Asterisks about Matthew Fisher can very much bat. Nathan Smith is almost a bowling all-rounder, so I think the fact that I didn't talk about his batting is not great for me, but can bat, very much can bat. But I think, as I've written here, I think you got the point that sort of Surrey's tail is a good bat. It's a good batting tail. Like Fisher, he has struggled on the flat pitches. He's taken 7 wickets at 46 so far this season. He's a player with test match experience, but has struggled for Surrey. I think, he's a good bowler. I think, again, he just is one of those bowlers like Fisher where on flat pitches it's really obvious, and I just don't think he has the kind of wherewithal and maybe the skills to really get through. But, maybe the pitches later on the season, if he's playing any later on in the season, will really help. And again, players like Fisher will be the same. Surrey also have Gus Atkinson. I think, I just thought I should mention, he doesn't play much for them at the moment because he's played so much as an England international, but it's just sort of supplementing that point of just the incredible depth this squad has. Again, going on to who I mentioned for the sort of batting aspect of him, but Jamie Overton, whenever he's in that bowling unit, he sort of adds the kind of little element of pace and bounce, which I think they kind of don't really have. Because, other than that, I think they have a kind of classical English bowling lineup of a kind of fairly standard medium to fast-paced bowlers, or medium fast-paced bowlers, in that kind of battery of seam bowlers. I think Jamie Overton, when he can play for them, helps and would have helped a lot more had they had real flat pitches the whole of the start of the season, and had he been available for more of it. Tom Laws, who impressed in England Lions tour over the England Lions tour over the winter, is an incredibly talented cricketer with the ball. I mean, a career bowling average of 25. As I mentioned, he's about 22. I think it's evidence of that. I don't think many Division 1 fast bowlers who come up at that kind of age. He's taken about 80 wickets, so it's a good 3-4 years worth. There's not many bowlers who come in and are that good as a seam bowler at that age. Laws is still in and out of the side, but I think if he was playing for other counties, as I mentioned earlier, I think he'd be so far well established in other teams, and that's just the nature of Surrey. And I have such a laboured point at this point, but it's just crazy how many players they have who could easily make it into their team consistently. Again, another player I mentioned in the batting, Sam Curran's return to red ball cricket is just another string to the bow of Surrey. Another string to the bowl in many ways does work. And again, if he's available a lot in that later season, I think he'll be a huge part of Surrey's ability to take it on and possibly get that 4-peat. And again, similarly, his older brother Tom, who has for a while really not played much red ball cricket, did play some in 2024. Again, a sort of another reason. Again, another bowler who can bat, Tom Curran, obviously. They are just sort of cricketers who are just incredibly talented and really help your bowling if you have a sort of 4th or 5th seamer by the name of Curran in there. Maybe not Ben Curran, but Sam or Tom will massively will help Surrey come that end of the season. Ryan Patel has sort of, lovely medium pace as I've described it here, but he is just one of those players who just kind of, he's quite satisfying to watch whenever he bowls medium pace, which is very rare because, as I mentioned, Surrey have such depth. He has 23 first-class wickets in his career, which I think is cool, but 6 of them came in a spell of 6 for 5. He also has 1 wicket this season, and it was against Johnny Bairstow, who was going along unbelievably at the Oval. I was watching, scored about 85, and his team had scored about 170, so he'd been dominating the scoring. and Ryan Patel comes onto bowl, and lo and behold, gets him out for the 1 wicket of his season. I really hope in many ways, just for the statistical part of it, he doesn't get a wicket for the rest of the season. That was the only wicket he got. But again, kind of shows the classic kind of partnership breaker status that Ryan Patel kind of has, and that kind of like, who do you chuck the ball to? Your 7th seamer, your 6th seamer, and they get a wicket somehow. It's just the nature of cricket sometimes. Anyway, in the spin bowling department, as I've kind of mentioned sort of throughout this, Surrey don't really have a frontline spinner, and Dan Lawrence is kind of the closest thing they get to a full-time spinner. He's more used as sort of and any of their spinners for this matter is the case. He's more used as an option to kind of rotate the seam bowlers than as a primary wicket-taking option himself. And this year kind of is showing that, 12 wickets at 45, and last year he had a bowling average pretty similar. But I think he would have bowled a lot more. He's bowled a lot more overs than I think he would have likely expected to start the year. And I think that comes down to the pitches they've been playing on. Cameron Steele, as I mentioned, hasn't played much this season. Hasn't played at all this season. But his leg spin is incredibly valuable. And last year he did take 23 wickets at 29. So whether or not it's just a case of we'll see a load of Cameron Steele near the end of the season when they think the pitches will be more worn and they'll be spinning more, I'll be interested to see. Because, he's just a very good cricketer. Will Jacks, again, very similar to Dan Lawrence, as I mentioned. Bowls some very handy off breaks, but is primarily a batter. And again, you just would be bowling him to kind of rotate those other seamers. Surrey's most prolific part of their bowling lineup is their seamer, their seam bowling attack, and I think the spinners are used for resting them primarily. I think a bit of an indictment of the lack of effectiveness of their seamers / just the pitches they've been playing on is the amount that Dan Lawrence has bowled. Last year he bowled 170 overs over the course of a whole season. So far to halfway point of this season, Dan Lawrence has already bowled 150. So again, you can tell he's bowled much beyond what you'd expect for an early season sort of pitch or an early season kind of team. Again, the pitches have been flat, but again, for the rest of the season, I think for Surrey to get that four-peat, their seam bowlers need to step up quite majorly. Anyway, that kind of is the end of the bowling. Overall, kind of getting to our conclusive point here, Surrey are just simply put the sort of best run organisation and best run club in the country, and I think it will take a little bit of time to anyone can kind of overdo that work. They've built a sort of team and a squad and clearly an academy where it is just a recipe for success. I mean, Surrey have a lot of things in their favour. I mean, they've got probably one of the richest kind of communities for, for exceptionally good cricketing schools in the area, for private schools and stuff like that. And I would know that from, growing up playing against some of these teams. They've always had very good sides. I think Surrey's always been built for success when it comes to cricket, and I think they've finally in the last 10 years kind of harnessed that. They spend their money in a very clever way. I think, they have a lot of money. There's no hiding behind that. It's really obvious they do. But they use it in a clever way. They don't splash money unnecessarily. They don't spend a lot of money on players who might not necessarily really play much for them or do much for them. They are very specific in their recruitment. And just generally, they seem to just get it right, and their tactics on the field seem to work, and they're quite an old-fashioned cricketing side, but in many ways it still works in the county championship world. As I say, they haven't won that many games this season, but they haven't sort of been able to be put in positions to, and I just think their talent will overwhelm much of the side. If I was giving a prediction, and I would have done more of a Division 1 predictions had I got these out sooner, I think I still would be putting Surrey at the top. I think I just don't see any team being better than them for an entire season and getting more points for that matter. Would I love it to be another team? Absolutely. Some part of me does want to see Surrey's sort of era of dominance end. I just think, as I mentioned about Alex Stewart, Gareth Batty, Rory Burns, as those are sort of three, and what they've built around the club, and there's plenty of other people I'm sure that can be mentioned, but they have just built a team with it is a recipe for success. So, will they be toppled? God knows. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. This is the end of the previews. They kind of felt like they never would end, but they are done. All of them will be here in a little couple of playlists here, Division 1 and Division 2. I hope you've really enjoyed them. It's been been very fun for me to be doing them, and I hope there'll be more County Chat sort of content coming. As I mentioned sort of throughout this episode, there's going to be sort of roundup content for sort of the first half of the season, maybe seeing how these takes went, how did I do compared to what has actually happened. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And that has been the County Chat's previews. Thank you very much for watching.